betrayed and thrown from a cliff until the Alpha King claimed his stolen Omega. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Sophie McCallan had never felt so alone. The world she once knew, her pack, had cast her aside as easily as one would discard an old cloak. As an Omega, Sophie was always considered weaker, but now, as the pack's newest outcast, she felt as though the very air around her rejected her existence. It was late in the evening when the betrayal happened. The others in her pack had gathered for a ritual, one that was supposed to solidify their unity. But as the ceremony continued, Sophie found herself standing at the edge of a cliff, pushed from behind, her heart pounding in her chest as she realized what was happening. The pack, once her family, now turned on her. Her body tumbled down the jagged rocks, the cold wind rushing past her, her screams silenced by the night. She landed hard, the pain searing through her body as she lay broken at the base of the cliff. Sophie had lost everything. But what she didn't know was that this moment of despair would be the catalyst for her true destiny. As the night grew darker, a shadow moved in the distance. The Alpha King, Zane Thornridge, had been out on a hunt, his keen senses alerting him to something wrong in the air. He had heard the rumors of Sophie's rejection, her disgrace, but nothing prepared him for what he would find when he stumbled upon her. There she was, lying motionless on the ground, her body battered but her spirit still holding on. Zane, the cold and ruthless Alpha King, known for his power and dominance, found himself drawn to her. He approached cautiously, feeling something shift inside him as he knelt beside her. Sophie, despite her pain, slowly opened her eyes, her gaze blurry but still defiant. She had been thrown away, but here, in front of her, was someone who would change everything. Zane's touch was gentle as he scooped her up, cradling her in his arms. His strength was undeniable, but there was something else in his eyes as he looked down at her, something he hadn't expected to find. It was a bond, an invisible thread that connected them in a way he couldn't explain. As he carried her back to his territory, Zane's mind raced. Sophie, the Omega rejected by her own pack, had somehow found her way into his world. And as he looked down at her, the realization struck him. She was no longer the broken Omega. She was his. Sophie was the fated mate he had been searching for, the one he was destined to claim. The one who would change everything. Sophie's body was aching, but she was alive. The wind howled as Zane carried her through the dense woods, each step feeling like the start of a new chapter. Her body was bruised and battered, yet the pain in her chest from the betrayal was harder to bear than any physical wound. She had always been the Omega who didn't fit in, the one who couldn't shift, the one who was constantly reminded of her weakness. But now, in the arms of this Alpha King, Sophie felt something she had never felt before, an odd sense of safety, of belonging. She was no longer just the outcast. She was his. Zane's eyes kept flicking down to her as he walked. He couldn't explain it, but something was stirring within him, something he had never felt for another person. When he had first found Sophie at the bottom of the cliff, his heart had hardened with the duty to save her, to fix what had been broken. But now, holding her close, he felt the connection deepening between them, like a magnetic pull he couldn't fight. As they reached the castle, Zane's thoughts were racing. He had always been in control, the one who made the decisions. But Sophie. She was different. She wasn't like any other Omega he had ever known. She was strong, even in her weakness. Her spirit was unbroken, despite the way her pack had treated her. She was more than he had expected, more than he could have hoped for. He laid her gently on the soft bed. In his chambers, his eyes never leaving her face. She looked fragile, her pale skin almost glowing in the moonlight filtering through the window. Her long, dark hair fanned out across the pillows, and for a moment, Zane simply watched her, overwhelmed by the pull he felt towards her. Sophie stirred, her eyelids fluttering as she slowly regained consciousness. She blinked a few times, confusion clouding her gaze as she tried to make sense of her surroundings. When her eyes locked onto Zane's, she froze. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice weak. Zane stood at her bedside, his posture commanding but gentle. "You're safe now," he said softly. "You're in my castle. You're not alone anymore." Sophie swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. "But, why?" she asked, struggling to sit up. "Why would you help me? I'm nothing. I'm just an Omega, a broken one." Zane stepped closer, his gaze softening. "You're not nothing. You're mine. I've been searching for you, Sophie, for longer than you know." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Sophie's breath caught in her throat as the realization settled over her. He wasn't just offering her a place to stay. He was offering her something more. A future. His future. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. Zane reached down, gently lifting her hand into his. "You're my fated mate," he said, his voice low and steady. "The one I've been destined to find. And now that I've found you, I won't let anyone take you away from me." Sophie's mind spun. She had never believed in the concept of fated mates. It had always seemed like a fairy tale, a myth to comfort those who believed in destiny. But now, with Zane's touch grounding her, she began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, this was her story. Maybe there was a reason for everything that had happened to her. Zane was real, his presence overwhelming yet comforting. The Alpha King, the powerful leader of the pack, was hers. She wasn't just some forgotten Omega anymore. She was his. The weight of his words settled over her, and for the first time in years, Sophie allowed herself to believe that she might be worthy of something greater. Something more than just survival. Zane's eyes softened as he brushed a lock of hair away from her face. "Rest, Sophie. We have much to talk about, but for now, you need your strength." Sophie nodded, her eyes fluttering closed, but the words "you're mine" echoed in her mind, filling her with both fear and hope. She was his, and there was no going back. Sophie had no idea what the future held, but for the first time, she was ready to face it. And whatever came next, she would face it with Zane by her side. Sophie woke up to the soft sound of birds outside the window. She blinked a few times, taking in her new surroundings. The room was unlike any she had ever seen. Rich tapestries adorned the walls, and the large bed she lay on was draped with thick, luxurious sheets. The warmth of the room made her feel safe, a stark contrast to the cold, bitter night she had endured. Her body still ached, but there was a sense of comfort here, something she had never felt before. Her mind raced as she recalled the events that had led her here. Zane Thornridge, the Alpha King, had found her, carried her away from the cliff, and brought her to his castle. Sophie couldn't help but wonder how it was possible. How had she gone from being the rejected Omega, cast aside by her pack, to being in the arms of the most powerful Alpha in the land? She had always thought that her fate was sealed, that she would never escape the life she had been given. But now, with Zane's words echoing in her mind, Sophie wasn't so sure. She was his fated mate. It was hard to believe, yet it felt right. She wasn't sure if she was ready for all the implications that came with it, but she knew one thing for sure: her life had changed in ways she couldn't even imagine. Zane had kept his distance the past few days, letting Sophie rest and heal. But today, she felt different. Stronger. She knew she needed to face him, to understand what this bond between them truly meant. As she walked through the grand hallways of the castle, her steps were cautious, but her heart beat with anticipation. Zane's presence was like a force of nature, impossible to ignore. She had spent so much time trying to avoid him, but now she felt an undeniable pull toward him. The moment she stepped into his study, she found him standing by the window, looking out at the vast lands that stretched before him. He turned when he heard her approach, and for a moment, they simply stared at each other. Sophie could see the raw intensity in his eyes, the weight of responsibility he carried as an Alpha King, but there was something else there too, a softness, a vulnerability that made her heart flutter. "Sophie," Zane said, his voice low and filled with something she couldn't quite place. "You've been resting for long enough. I think it's time we talk." She nodded, her voice barely a whisper as she spoke. "I don't understand, Zane. Why me? Why would you choose me, an Omega, someone who has nothing to offer? Zane's expression softened as he crossed the room and stood before her. You're not just an Omega, Sophie, he said, his voice steady. You're everything I've been searching for. I never believed in fated mates until I met you, but now that I have, I can't deny it. You're mine, and I'm yours. Sophie's breath caught in her throat. She had heard the words, but hearing him say them so confidently made them feel real. She wasn't sure what this meant for them, but she knew that she was no longer the broken Omega she once thought she was. She was something more. I don't know if I'm ready for this, Sophie admitted, her voice shaky. I don't know if I'm ready for all of this. Zane reached out, gently cupping her face in his large hand. You don't have to be ready right now, he said softly. But you will be. I'm here for you, Sophie. We'll figure this out together. Sophie's heart swelled with emotion. She had spent so many years feeling alone, unwanted, and now, here she was, standing in front of the Alpha King, the most powerful man in the land, and she was his. The realization was overwhelming, but it also brought a sense of peace she had never known. Zane's touch was like a promise, and for the first time, Sophie felt like she truly mattered. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling. Zane smiled, his eyes softening. There's nothing to thank me for, he said. You're my fated mate. This is what we're meant to be. Now, let's start this journey together. Sophie nodded. A small smile tugging at her lips. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she was willing to find out. With Zane by her side, she knew she would never be alone again. Sophie woke up to the soft morning light streaming through the windows, casting a golden glow over the room. Her body was still healing, but there was something different today. The weight of her past seemed a little less heavy, and the uncertainty about her future felt a little more bearable. Zane's words from the previous night echoed in her mind. You're mine, and I'm yours. Sophie had never imagined that one day, she would be standing in the presence of the Alpha King, and that he would claim her as his fated mate. She had always been the outcast, the one who couldn't shift, the one whose pack had abandoned her. Now, everything had changed. The bond between them was undeniable, and as much as Sophie wanted to fight it, she felt herself drawn to Zane in ways she couldn't explain. The connection between them was growing stronger, and it was both thrilling and terrifying at the same time. Sophie took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Today, she would face her new reality. As she got dressed in the simple but elegant clothes Zane had provided her, she couldn't help but wonder what life would be like with him. Would he always be this kind and patient with her? Or would she eventually disappoint him, like she had disappointed so many others in her past? When Sophie finally left her room, she found herself in the grand hall of the castle. The walls were lined with towering windows that let in the morning light, and the air was thick with the scent of the forest outside. Zane was waiting for her, standing at the end of the hall with his back to her. His imposing figure, his strength, his authority, it was all too much. But as she approached, he turned to face her, and for the first time, Sophie saw something in his eyes that made her heart race. It was tenderness. Sophie, Zane said, his voice warm and inviting. Are you feeling better? Sophie nodded, though she still wasn't sure how to express the whirlwind of emotions inside her. I feel different, she admitted. Stronger, maybe. But also, scared. Zane stepped closer, his presence overwhelming but comforting at the same time. You don't have to be scared, he said softly, his hand reaching out to gently touch her arm. You are safe here. You're not alone anymore. Sophie's heart fluttered at the sincerity in his voice. But I don't know how to be what you need me to be, she said quietly, her gaze downcast. I don't know if I'm enough. Zane's hand lifted her chin gently, making her meet his gaze. You don't have to be anything you're not. You are enough, Sophie. You always have been. His words were like a balm to her wounded soul, and Sophie felt a surge of emotion rise within her. For the first time, she truly believed it. She wasn't just an Omega. She wasn't just the rejected one. She was his. And that thought filled her with both hope and fear. What happens now? Sophie asked, her voice trembling slightly. Zane smiled, a small but reassuring smile that made her feel like she could take on anything. Now, he said, we move forward together. We build something new, something that's ours. Sophie didn't know what the future held, but she knew that she wasn't alone anymore. With Zane by her side, she felt like anything was possible. As they stood there, in the heart of his castle, Sophie realized that she wasn't just a part of his world, she was his world. And no matter what came next, she was ready to face it, because she knew she had finally found where she truly belonged. Sophie had only begun to realize the depth of the bond she shared with Zane, but the days since she arrived at his castle had changed everything. With every passing moment, their connection grew stronger, and Sophie found herself torn between the fear of the unknown and the hope that Zane could truly be the one to make her feel whole. Zane, ever patient, gave her space to adjust, yet never allowed her to feel alone. He was always near, watching over her with an intensity that both comforted and overwhelmed her. As the days passed, Sophie began to settle into her new life. The castle, once a place of uncertainty, started to feel like home. Zane had made sure of it. His presence was a constant reminder that she was safe, but more than that, it was a promise she belonged here, with him. One evening, as they sat together by the fireplace, Zane spoke, his voice low and filled with something Sophie couldn't quite identify. Sophie, he began, his eyes never leaving hers, I know this has all happened so fast, but I need you to understand something. You're not just my mate. You're my Luna. You'll rule by my side, as my equal. The weight of his words settled over Sophie like a heavy cloak. She had never imagined herself in a position of power. She had always been told she was too weak, too broken, to ever lead anyone. But here, in Zane's eyes, she saw something different. He saw her strength, her potential, and it made her heart swell with emotions she couldn't put into words. I don't know if I'm ready for that, Sophie admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Zane reached out, his hand brushing hers gently. You are, he said, his voice unwavering. You've always been ready. You just had to believe it. And I believe in you. Sophie's throat tightened at the sincerity in his eyes. Zane had never doubted her, even when she had doubted herself. It was a gift she never thought she would receive, and it made her wonder how she could ever have felt so alone. She looked at him, her mind racing. The idea of being Luna, of standing beside him in this new world, was both thrilling and terrifying. Could she truly live up to the expectations? Could she truly be the woman Zane saw in her? She didn't have all the answers, but one thing was certain: Zane was giving her a chance to be something she had never allowed herself to be. What if I fail? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. You won't fail, Zane said firmly, a soft smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Because I'll be with you every step of the way. Sophie took a deep breath, letting his words sink in. She wasn't alone anymore. She had Zane, and together, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. As she looked into his eyes, Sophie realized that for the first time in her life, she felt truly seen. She wasn't just an Omega anymore. She was Zane's Luna, his equal, his mate. The future no longer seemed like an overwhelming force, it felt like an opportunity. An opportunity to create a life she had never dared to dream of. I'm ready, Sophie whispered, her voice steady as she reached for Zane's hand. Together, Zane said, his grip tightening around hers. And with that simple promise, Sophie knew that whatever came next, they would face it as one. Sophie stood in the grand hall, her heart racing as she gazed out the tall windows at the vast land beyond. The wind had picked up, rustling the trees outside, but it didn't seem to match the storm brewing inside her. She had spent her whole life trying to fit in, trying to be accepted. Now, she was standing at the precipice of a life she had never dared to imagine. Zane had given her everything, his trust, his heart, and his belief that she could be more than just the broken Omega she had been. But the weight of it all was starting to feel too heavy. As the days passed, Sophie settled more into her role by Zane's side. She had never thought of herself as someone who could lead, but with Zane's guidance, she found herself growing into the role of Luna. The pack accepted her, though Sophie could still feel the weight of their watchful eyes. She wasn't just Zane's mate now. She was his equal, and that was something she wasn't sure she was ready for. Yet Zayn made her feel like she could conquer anything, as long as he was by her side. One afternoon, as they walked through the gardens of the castle, Zayn turned to her with a serious expression. "Sophie," he began, his voice carrying an edge of something Sophie couldn't place, "I need you to understand something. This isn't just about us anymore. The pack looks to us, to you, for leadership. They expect us to guide them, to make decisions that will affect everyone. And I need you to be ready for that." Sophie's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just about their love, their bond. It was about responsibility. It was about power. "I don't know if I can do this," Sophie confessed, the weight of her words sinking deep into her chest. "I've always been the one who was pushed aside, the one no one believed in. Now I'm supposed to lead?" Zayn's expression softened, and he stepped closer to her, taking her hand in his. "You're not alone in this," he said, his voice filled with assurance. "You have me. And you have the strength to do it. I've seen it in you, Sophie. You were born to be my Luna." Sophie wanted to believe him. She wanted to feel the strength he saw in her. But doubts lingered in her mind, whispers of the past that tried to hold her back. "What if I fail?" she asked quietly. "What if I'm not enough?" Zayn lifted her chin gently, his gaze meeting hers with unwavering intensity. "You won't fail," he said firmly. "Because you're not doing this alone. You have me, and you have the pack. We're in this together." Sophie swallowed the lump in her throat, her heart swelling with a mixture of fear and hope. Zayn's confidence in her was enough to push through the doubts, but it didn't erase the fear that still lingered deep inside. She wasn't sure if she was ready to be the leader Zayn believed she could be. But standing beside him, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she didn't need to be perfect. She just needed to try. "I'm scared," Sophie admitted, her voice small. "But I'm ready to try." Zayn smiled, a look of pride crossing his face. "That's all I need, Sophie. Just your willingness to try." Sophie looked up at him, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't have all the confidence she needed. But with Zayn by her side, she knew she could face anything. Together, they would lead their pack into the future, and Sophie would learn to become the Luna she was always meant to be. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be theirs to walk. And that was enough. Sophie stood by the large window in the study, watching the landscape beyond the castle walls. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of the forest, the earth, and the promise of a future that was slowly becoming clearer to her. The weight of her new life, the responsibility that had been placed on her shoulders, was still a heavy presence in her mind. But there was also something else, something powerful, growing inside her. She wasn't just the Omega who had been discarded, the one who had been told she wasn't good enough. She was Zayn's Luna now, and that meant something. The realization still felt foreign, but with each passing day, Sophie could feel the change within herself. She had started to believe in the possibility of a future where she wasn't just surviving, but truly living. Zayn had given her that, and now, she was ready to stand by his side, to be the partner he needed her to be. As she turned away from the window, Zayn entered the room, his presence commanding yet comforting. He always seemed to know when she needed him, even without her saying a word. He approached her slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. "You've been thinking again," he said softly, a hint of amusement in his voice. Sophie smiled, though it was tinged with uncertainty. "I can't help it. There's so much to think about. So much that I still don't understand." Zayn reached out, his hand gently brushing her cheek. "You don't have to understand everything right now," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "We'll take it one step at a time. We're in this together, Sophie. Always." Sophie's heart swelled with emotion at his words. There was something so comforting in Zayn's unwavering belief in her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't facing the world alone. She had Zayn, and together, they would face whatever challenges came their way. "I'm scared," Sophie admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can do this. Be what everyone needs me to be." Zayn stepped closer, wrapping his arms around her in a protective embrace. You don't have to be perfect, he whispered into her ear. You just have to be you. And that's more than enough. Sophie closed her eyes, allowing herself to lean into his warmth, his strength. For so long, she had been told that she wasn't enough. But now, in Zane's arms, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Thank you, Sophie whispered, her voice thick with emotion. For believing in me. Zane pulled back just enough to look at her, his gaze softening. I always will, he said, his hand cupping her face gently. You're mine, Sophie. And I'll never let you go. Sophie smiled, her heart full of love and gratitude. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. For sure, she wasn't alone anymore. With Zane by her side, she was ready to face whatever came their way. Together, they would lead their pack, build a future, and create a life that was more than Sophie had ever dreamed of. The road ahead might be uncertain, but with Zane, she knew she could face anything. And that thought filled her with a peace she had never known before. Sophie stood in the center of the grand hall, her breath steadying as she gazed around at the gathered members of the pack. The air was thick with anticipation, a mix of curiosity and respect that hung heavily in the room. This was the moment. Zane stood beside her, his presence both comforting and empowering. He had always been her strength, but today, she would show them that she could stand on her own, as his equal. The ceremony was simple but filled with meaning. It wasn't just a formal acknowledgement of their bond, it was a promise. A promise to lead together, to protect their people, and to honor the trust they had in one another. As the Alpha King, Zane had already proven his worth countless times. But now, Sophie had to prove herself to the pack, to show them that she was more than just the Omega they had once rejected. She was the Luna, the heart of their future. Zane turned to her, his eyes soft with affection and encouragement. You're ready, he whispered, his voice low enough only for her to hear. Sophie nodded, her gaze meeting his for a moment. In that instant, she felt the weight of everything they had been through, the pain, the betrayal, the doubts, and yet, in Zane's eyes, she saw something else. She saw trust. Thank you, she whispered back, her heart full of gratitude. The time had come. As the elders stepped forward to officially recognize her as Luna, Sophie felt the weight of the pack's gaze upon her. It wasn't judgment, but expectation. They were looking to her for guidance, for leadership. She straightened her back, holding her head high. This was her moment to step into the role she had once thought impossible. Zane placed his hand over hers, giving it a reassuring squeeze as the elders spoke the words that sealed their bond. Sophie McCallan, the elder began, his voice echoing in the vast hall, you are now Luna of the Thornridge pack, to stand by the side of our Alpha King and lead with strength, wisdom, and compassion. The words were simple, but they held so much weight. Sophie's heart pounded in her chest, but she stood tall, feeling the power of the pack's recognition flow through her. She was no longer the discarded Omega, she was their Luna, and she was ready to embrace it. Zane's hand never left hers as the elder finished the ceremony, and Sophie could feel the bond between them grow even stronger. She wasn't alone in this. She never would be again. As the ceremony came to a close, the pack members bowed their heads in respect, acknowledging Sophie's new role. The air seemed to shift, the weight of responsibility mingling with the warmth of acceptance. Sophie had always feared that she would never be enough, that she was too weak to lead. But standing there, in front of her pack, with Zane by her side, she realized something profound: she had always been enough. She had always had the strength within her, she just needed to believe it. As the pack began to disperse, Zane turned to her, a proud smile on his face. You did it, he said, his voice filled with admiration. Sophie smiled back, her heart light. We did it, she corrected, her voice steady with newfound confidence. Together. And as they stood there, side by side, Sophie knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, united in strength and in love. Sophie stood in the center of the grand hall, her breath steadying as she took in the view of her new life. The pack had accepted her as Luna, and though it was a step she had never thought possible, the weight of it all began to settle in her chest. Her mind swirled with all the responsibilities now placed upon her shoulders. She had always been the quiet, overlooked Omega, the one who could not shift and was rejected by her own pack. Yet now, she was here, standing proudly beside Zane, the Alpha King. It was surreal. Zane, sensing her unease, stood beside her, his strong presence grounding her. His hand brushed against hers, a silent reminder that she was not alone in this. He had always believed in her, and now, Sophie was beginning to believe in herself. 2. You're doing great, Zane whispered, his voice steady but filled with warmth. Sophie nodded, her gaze not leaving the pack members who had gathered to witness this moment. There was no turning back now. She was their Luna, and the road ahead would not always be easy. But for the first time, Sophie felt ready to walk it, with Zane by her side. Later that evening, after the ceremony had ended, Sophie and Zane walked through the castle gardens, their steps slow and deliberate. The air was crisp, the soft moonlight casting long shadows across the stone path. Do you ever feel like everything is moving too fast? Sophie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Zane glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. I've learned to trust the flow of things, he said, his voice calm. The universe has a way of guiding us, even when we don't realize it. Sophie smiled softly at his words. Zane's wisdom had always been one of the things she admired most about him. He never rushed things. He let them unfold naturally. But for Sophie, who had spent so long being told she wasn't enough, everything felt like it was happening at once. She was trying to catch up with herself. I just feel like I have so much to learn, Sophie admitted, her eyes meeting Zane's. There's so much about being Luna that I don't understand. Zane stopped walking and turned to face her. You'll learn, Sophie, he said, his voice firm but gentle. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just take it one step at a time. The pack trusts you, and so do I. Sophie felt her heart swell at his words. The confidence he had in her gave her the strength to believe in herself, even when doubt crept in. She wasn't sure where this journey would take her, but with Zane by her side, she felt like she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. Zane smiled, his hand brushing her cheek gently. You don't have to thank me, he replied softly. You are more than enough. And you always have been. Sophie leaned into his touch, feeling a sense of peace she had never known before. For the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider. She didn't feel like the Omega who had been rejected. She felt like Sophie McCallan, Luna of the Thornridge Pack, and that was more than enough. As they stood there, together in the quiet of the night, Sophie knew that the future was still uncertain, but one thing was clear, she was not alone. She had Zane, and with him, she would become the Luna she was always meant to be. Together, they would face whatever came next. And Sophie knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would be ready.